When a piece of media means a lot to me, I can always articulate why. Warcraft 3's intricate missions, deep lore and timeless presentation, Transistor's touching story, beautiful artwork and electric soundscape set clearly against moments of solitude when the protagonist stops to take in the view and hum a melody, the only thing she can at this point do with her voice. Baldur's Gate 3's lifelike characters and a tale of such scope that feels like you are on your own quest to destroy the One Ring at Mount Doom. Ask me about any of these, and I will gladly ruin our friendship by talking about them for hours. Mirror's Edge is different. The cult hit from 2008 boasted absurdly beautiful graphics that even a decade later in 2018, when I played it for the first time, had not aged, and gameplay which evokes a sense of flow in the player, a deep focus where the world around you fades out as you play. However, beyond that, it lacks all the things that usually draw my attention and keep me interested. The story is mostly an excuse to keep you running from point A to point B, with characters that are plot devices instead of people. While the reboot expands on the lore, it does so in shallow ways that make it clear that the story is not the focus of the franchise, the gameplay is. What else can you expect from the studio that since 2005 has brought the world Battlefield with a sense of pride and accomplishment, and little else? If you ignore ancient video game history, Mirror's Edge is the odd one out in DICE's portfolio. Gone are the large-scale battles, the team tactics and the chaos of a war zone. What you get instead is a linear experience where all you do is run. And while I'm used to games with very good gameplay loops enrapturing me for a while, like for example bullets per minute, they usually have very little staying power. But something keeps bringing me back to this pristine world. Just what? I don't know. There isn't a single character from the franchise that is complex, and only one that actually piqued my interest while playing, in both games. Why do I keep coming back? As I replayed the first two levels of Mirror's Edge with a more careful eye, I see my first hint as to why I'm so drawn to the world of this game, and why the reboot was so disappointing in that regard. The world is chock full of environmental storytelling. Little details that paint an incomplete picture of a world that the player can fill out. Perhaps the act of automatically filling in those details is what immerses me so, like wondering how all the advertisements became so uniform, what makes the color red so special besides the runners associating with it. Why this sudden crackdown on the runners? But I'm getting ahead of myself. Mirror's Edge tells most of its story using 2D animated cutscenes. It establishes an unnamed city, which in the reboot is called the City of Glass, or just Glass, of the nation of Cascadia. People there used to be free, but are now not anymore through the suppression of free journalism, opposing thought, erosion of civil rights, and constant, overwhelming surveillance. Eventually people rebelled in the November riots. However, they were violently suppressed and marked the point where the powers that be took almost complete control of the city, using the riots as justification for the tightening of freedom.
What it meant. Merc said your mom died. She was killed during the downtown riots. Protest marches that went bad. That's rough. After that...
That's rough, buddy.
It is still a democracy in name, but the news channels all say the same thing, cameras are everywhere, and paint is apparently government approved. Which, by the way, I'd like to stop here for a moment and say makes actually perfect sense, and I appreciate that some lowly game dev tasked with making this texture added this tiny detail, realizing that Glass, being as top-down defined in its design as it is, would absolutely need to dedicate part of its government to approve colors. Oh hey, I'm talking about environmental storytelling again. Moving on. So far it's all very standard dystopian stuff. The status quo is that the population is kept complacent through a combination of mindless entertainment, the 9-to-5 grind and control of the news. The few dissenters are rooted out through the surveillance apparatus and removed using the justice system. The runners serve as a de jure illegal but de facto permitted class because they move messages and goods between important people in a hidden way. They gain personal freedom at the cost of helping the city's corruption. Glass has a government, but that government is hopelessly corrupt and cannot stop the big companies of the city from taking more and more control. It's less 1984 and more an extremely pretty, brave new world, but it is still a dystopia. I think depictions of dystopias that oppress invisibly are rare in video games. Rarer still, one that focuses so strongly on a pretty outwards presentation while rotting on the inside. Especially in the late 2010s flood of post-apocalyptic YA dystopian novels. To this day, the design of Glass is still unique and I love it very much. If life there was, not dystopian, I'd want to live there, government-approved colors included. Another aspect of why the design of Mirror's Edge resonates with me so much is that while it is very futuristic, it actually isn't. Sure, the design of everything screams the future, but at no point do you actually see anything futuristic. Individual cars still drive on the ground, the buildings are all largely concrete or steel and glass blocks, and helicopters are the only flying thing you see. Cops still shoot at you with normal guns, there are no drones, people watch their stuff on flat TVs and so on. Technologically speaking, Glass is from 2008, but it simply doesn't look like it. Its mere appearance makes it look like the future, even though everything can and is happening today. I think that is a big part of the immersion I feel when playing it. The story takes a backseat, sure, but the narrative bleeds into the world. On the occasions you get down to street level, you see propaganda flags advertising safer streets. These confirm that the very riots protesting for more rights were used as an excuse to suppress those rights even more. But let's get into the plot. After introducing the player character Faith Connors and Mercury or Merc, the obligatory radio voice in our ear, we also meet a side character named Celeste, who is a fellow runner.
Shots fired!
After noticing that Faith's sister Kate, who is a police officer, is in the same location as a police alert of shots fired, Faith runs to the building and they meet. Now, from a pure writing perspective, the scene that follows is fairly well written.
Kate?
It gives the player a number of pieces of information in a natural way. 1. Faith and her sister are estranged, one having chosen the outcast runner's life and the other the one of a cop. 2. The single gunshot killed Robert Pope, a candidate for mayor who ran on the promise to make the city less corrupt, a promise the characters all believe based on the fact that Pope participated in the November riots, and from having known the parents of the sisters who also participated and whose mother died there. 3. It is obvious that Kate will be framed for the murder, having magically blacked out before he was killed in his office. 4. Faith finds a piece of paper from Pope's diary, which is missing, at the scene with the words Icarus to the H ... written on it. Despite all of this, Kate refuses to run, stating that it would only make her look guilty, even though she's in the process of obviously being framed for a murder. The sisters say goodbye and Faith flees from the incoming cops to the scene. So, I just called this scene good writing for conveying a lot of information, but at the same time, it fails on the emotional front. I feel no closer to any character. I learned something, but why should I care? It's simply an objective, running away from the cops that cut the interaction short. I think the problem is that the sisters are less interesting than everything that is happening around them. There is a cutscene later on where Faith interacts with Kate's boss and he states that private corporations are pushing to enter the jurisdiction of the police. She also finds an ex-runner who is a total sleazebag. He tells her that if someone high up had Pope killed, they probably used a fixer called Ropeburn. He's a side antagonist and an ex-wrestler who used to be a bodyguard of the mayor until he got rewarded with his own shipping company, which is just a front for continuing to provide unsavory services to powerful people. something you learn later when you enter the facility and find that all work on shipping has stopped. Despite the guy sounding like an antagonist, he really isn't. Speaking of antagonists, there are none, actually. The story relies on the emotional connection between the sisters to push forward and the mystery of Project Icarus, but if you are not engaged in that, you are just playing the game instead of engaging with the plot. The writers insisted on making this a personal story, but instead of actually making that the game, it just serves as an excuse to run from point A to point B. Anyway, we quickly find Ropeburn, confront him, and he says that yeah, he had Pope killed through an assassin. He tells you where they plan on meeting up next, but before he can betray who it was, he gets killed. In a short cutscene, Faith says some stuff about her past to Celeste and shares that info about the meeting, and I'm sure you can guess where this is going. Yeah, you go to the place which is a mall and the assassin is there, but leads you into a police ambush. Fantastic. Faith escapes, but this leaves her with no leads. She revisits the runner who gave her the intel on Ropeburn, thinking he is responsible, but he says no, and she believes him, even though he gives off major creep vibes. Faith, then seeing the logo of a specific corporation, asks Marcus to look up info about it because
been seeing their name around,
revealing it to be a private security company. You get an address, and that's the next level. This is the part that makes me scratch my head the most. Jackknife, the sleazebag runner, is revealed at the end to be working with the bad guys anyway. And if he wasn't, why does Faith believe him here? She doesn't press him at all, she just lets him go. And then this weird connection she makes to the company, which luckily gives her another once she searches their office. It's so strange. It's like they wanted a twist in the narrative to make it a bit more interesting of a mystery, but they had no clue on how to sensibly make Faith get back on solving the mystery again. So she just goes to the nearest office of big private security firm, and there happens to be the solution to the mystery in their basement. Project Icarus is revealed to be the project to take down the runners for good. In the game, this manifests as private security guys who are trained as runners chasing after you. That's it. They have data on the runners, sure, but that was not unexpected. You stick out by being different. The game establishes at the start that as long as the runners don't try to change the status quo, they're left alone. They're not hiding in plain sight. Training a bunch of goons to parkour and catch them is like the stupidest evil plot I've seen. This is played as some grand revelation, and unfortunately, those parkour guys show up in every future chase sequence but the final level, which is like 2. So, all that remains is getting Kate out. She's been tried and convicted in a mock court and is on a prison transport. You rescue her, but the cops track her to Merc's hideout while Faith is gone, wound him and kidnap her, which he tells to Faith before he dies. It's a somber moment because Merc is like the only person you've interacted with for any extended amount of time, even if the majority of conversations was directions and him warning you about incoming cops. This is another opportunity where the characterization could have been improved. Look, I understand that when running, you probably won't have the breath to chat all the time, but like, you have an earpiece on you all the time, and yet the only time he speaks is when he's giving you directions or warning you to get the fuck out because cops are closing in. Why not use this opportunity to write some banter for the two? This way, we get more attached to the guy and Faith, and you can throw in some more lore tidbits. The game desperately needs moments where it slows down. You could have had Faith eat lunch while staring down at the city square from the rooftops, and they could have had a conversation about how different they are from everyone else, and why they do what they do, etc, etc. Just an idea. Anyway, before I rant on, let's finish up the plot. You head to the Shard, which is the highest building in town, and the mayor's office because for some reason Kate's been taken there to be flown out of the city. I think the game tries to imply that the mayor will sell it as her being at large to tighten security, increase control, but it's a minor point. You go there, you meet Miller, Kate's boss, again, and he helps you out, becoming a new voice in the ear.
Good work. Checker.
Gonna shoot me too?
No.
You get to the rooftop, where Jackknife of all people is getting Kate to a helicopter and proceeds to say one of the corniest lines in video game history.
You can't live on the edge all your life, Faith! Sooner or later, you have to jump!
You stare at the city, title screen, credits roll, banger song. Seriously, the ending credits song is so good. The music in general is so good, I love it. I think I've already made my point clear that I'm not emotionally attached to any of the characters, so the game kinda just ending didn't do much for me. As a final tidbit, during the credits, if you stay for a while, you get a final radio broadcast that the city's surveillance network is down for a while and the sisters are missing. It's no surprise that Mirror's Edge is carried largely by the gameplay. It is, at its best, when you are running across rooftops alone, occasionally stopping to enjoy the view of this concrete hellscape, accompanied by a serene soundtrack. These sections are all too often interrupted with cops storming a rooftop and pushing you to run away. Police shooting at you is unfortunately a crux that Mirror's Edge relies on a lot. It's especially bad when, even though the game stresses that you can run past all encounters, the level resembles a combat arena and the intention of the designers is clear that you need to knock out some cops before you proceed, usually by making the only visible way out so exposed that you cannot take it while being shot at.
Really, I don't understand what the obsession is.
The combat system is at least simple and mercifully fast. You pretty much only have to drop kick, a simple punch combo and a drop down one-hit knockout. You can also disarm opponents and shoot back, but I've yet to meet anyone who likes Mirror's Edge and actually took that route. Even then, the combat system clearly was not the focus of the designers, which makes me wonder why they decided to include the combat-centric sections anyway. Probably to break up the running sections at least a little, but running is what this game does so well. I wonder if it was just a notion that there is no other way to change the pace of the game other than by fighting. This odd focus on combat as the only logical addition to the game other than running also causes problems in the reboot. Either way, the combat detracts from the game and it's so simple that there's little to say on it. The only way to reliably beat cops I've found is to dropkick and then combo punch them, as that is the fastest way to knock them out. Despite these complaints, I must take some time to praise how much you feel like you're part of the world you play in. Mirror's Edge, to this day, boasts probably the best first-person player model because the developers actually went to great lengths to have the model always be right under the camera in the physical space, rather than it just being something you only see in the first-person view. You feel like you have weight, your momentum matters, and keeping it while maneuvering around is fantastic. It sucks you in. The only game that beats this is the reboot. To explain this a little bit better, in first-person video games, your player model and what you see through the first-person camera are two different things. And anything you see through the camera, like guns or hands, is not based on existing in the 3D space of the game, but inside your camera. That is why games that model your body from the player point of view do it based on the camera, which is why it looks really weird when you get close to objects in the game world. A lot of games completely evade this by making the player model invisible from the first-person camera.
Oh.
This is why in games like Counter-Strike you don't see anything when you look down, so your player model existing in the game world does not block the vision from your camera. The levels are also engaging by themselves, which I think is one of the main draws as to why I'm so intrigued by this world. The game finds plenty of excuses to occasionally get you down from the samey rooftops to level ground, underground or inside buildings. And while these are short sections, they show the world in more shades of color. You get to explore the subway of the city, its sewers, and the harbor shipping facilities. Each of these get their own strong, primary color, always accompanied by white. There's even a boat, which is a fantastic claustrophobic contrast to the usually fairly open spaces, and could have been a great level if the game didn't insist on forcing a number of combat sections into it.
Oh yeah. God, I fucking hate that.
Each level is carefully designed so that while there is the most obvious path, there are also other paths you can take that are often faster. That most obvious path is shown with a beautiful minimalist system of coloring singular objects red and pressing your Alt key to be shown the direction you need to run in. This makes the game shine on repeat playthroughs when you decide to stop following your runner's vision. This makes an open world reboot make a lot of sense. Mirror's Edge is all about traversal, so make an interesting world to explore and you've got it. But before we turn to that lovely mess, let's wrap up the first game, because as I continued on through the levels it only got worse. I think the reason why I'm so interested in this world is also at the same time its flaw. You see, I have this theory that when writing, world building is actually secondary. I don't subscribe to the Tolkien or GRRM school of writing where you need to have 7,000 years of history lined up before you get to your actual plot. I think you have to craft a plot with compelling characters and then you kinda just fill in the rest. The best example for this is still Harry Potter. The plot around the main characters of those books is seriously good and they are, for the most part, characterized very well. There's been plenty of honestly legitimate hot takes about those books ever since JKR went off the transphobic deep end, so I won't rehash them here, but the actual world building of those books is shit. That's just an objective fact. JKR is a hack writer who caught lightning in a bottle. It's obvious that she made up whatever she needed for a particular plot idea basically on the spot and didn't think about it much beyond that, and it bit her plenty in the ass in later books. But I also think that writing like that, with plenty of gaps in your world, especially when it's supposed to be a parallel or adapted from the real world, does absolute wonders for the imagination of your audience, and I think that's exactly what's happening here with Mirror's Edge. The City of Glass is very close to the real world. There is no futurism, just a story of a present-day city sliding from democracy into oligarchy, and of the corporate overlords finally taking control and a population too numb to do anything about it.
We've got private firms muscling in on our districts.
City Eye Channel News can now confirm that the suspect held in custody in the Robert Poe murder case is
So that's
CPF
no,
officer
then.
Kate Connors. This has led to questions being raised at City Hall about the competence and future of the CPF.
Miller. Shit.
Seriously?
Yeah. Should never have trusted a blue. He's with Brokeburn.
All in a beautiful designed package. And that is all presented in snippets, throwaway sentences and conversations about other topics, radio segments you hear for a few seconds, news anchors talking on TVs as you run past. It allows your imagination to kick in, to fill in the snippets, and I think that's what mine did. I think the lack of attachment to the characters in the actual story only aids in this, ironically. You're less focused on why people are doing stuff that you don't care about, and instead latch on to the information given about everything else. I can't be the only one, because despite failing EA's ridiculous standards, it sold around 2.5 million copies by 2013. With generally positive reviews, it developed a passionate fan base and can be considered a cult classic today. For its time, when first-person games in every shade of brown always forced a gun into your hand, Mirror's Edge stood out, with its bold colors and the ability to throw the gun away. Because of that modest success, at least by EA standards, it took years for another game in the franchise to be announced. But when it did, oh boy, did the hype train start. The announcement trailer released at E3 2013 generated massive amounts of hype within that fanbase of the first game. I don't think anyone back then had been expecting the next entry in the franchise, knowing the financial results of the original. It was a bad time to be a niche game at EA, as the failure to turn Dead Space into an action multimedia franchise shows, and the studio only wanted more big hits. A surprise then that they would allow anyone at DICE to work on anything other than Battlefield. After all, how else could their poor CEO afford his 15th yacht? I think it's impossible to be a fan of the original and not see the great parts of Mirror's Edge Catalyst shine through. And that's what makes it so gut-wrenching. You can't write off the game in its entirety. You can't declare it garbage and detach emotionally, like with that one Avatar The Last Airbender movie that never got made. But it's also been a while. So how about we get that second part of the video started? Even with all its failings as a reboot, Catalyst does absolutely nail the presentation. I like the vibe of the first game more, but DICE has crafted an absurdly beautiful world that allows the design decisions of the original and pushes it into the future. Unfortunately, it has the depth of a puddle. The title of this video stems from the profound feeling of emptiness I had after finishing the second game, and I'm curious to see if this emotion will repeat itself. I write this after having played Catalyst's first real mission, which starts the plot. The decision to have you start out at the ground and see a bit of life happening there is a great one. Unfortunately, there aren't a lot of those when it comes to the plot. Catalyst stands somewhere between a soft reboot and a full reboot of the series. Faith, her sister Caitlin, and their estranged relationship remains. Everything else has changed. Glass has been reworked completely as a fully futuristic city. Drones fly through the air. TVs are now translucent glass panes. There are even several skyscrapers with windmills built directly into them. It bleeds into the gameplay too as Faith gains a grappling hook pulled straight from the future. The entire HUD of the game is written as an in-character thing that you see through a lens placed directly in your eye. It leads to a fun moment where you have to install an ad blocker so you can even play the game.
I'm not reformed at all.
There you go. You're off the grid.
Gone too is the restraint of the first game in the depiction of this dystopia. Instead of quiet control through media, the endless grind of a 40-hour workweek and the illusion of a democracy, we have gone full oligopoly. Citizens are called employees, and the city's entire business is ruled over by a few extremely wealthy families who form the board of directors, the highest legislative instance, while at the same time owning the 4 or 5 giant corporations which service and manufacture everything for the city. Employees are kept in check through endless consumption and the false idea of meritocracy, that if they just work hard, they can climb the corporate ladder and afford an apartment in the exclusive parts of the city. It's a system so bold-faced, any reasonable person would have deduced this illusion pretty much immediately, because every time you change areas, it displays a lore tidbit about the name and population makeup of the area. Both the game and the characters identify these as low-caste, mid-caste and high-caste, all but confirming this to be a corporate caste system from the get-go, and the point of a caste system is that there is little to no flexibility in moving between the castes. I like the original more, sure, but I don't dislike the new Glass either, and it is clear that care and work has gone into it. For example, cleaning robots frequently occupy glass surfaces, a great way to explain how they all are so clean, while at the same time fulfilling the gameplay function of making you realize that there is in fact glass there, like windows with prints to stop birds from flying against them. The strong primary colors, accompanied by white, are still here and have been modernized with care. I don't like this new style of writing that is as subtle as a glass window to the face though. Unfortunately, it's something that is going to accompany us throughout the plot. The game begins with Faith out of juvenile detention after 2 years of imprisonment. The game makes it clear that she is a trouble starter, as her original sentence was just 2 months and the entire year was tacked on for insubordination. It's a good start, but also the last glimpse of actual society you will see. Faith is quickly picked up by fellow runner Icarus, who has been sent by her adoptive father Noah, who took Faith in after her parents died during the November riots. Faith's sister Caitlin is shown in flashbacks but not mentioned further and presumed dead. She's also warned by numerous people about her debt to mob boss Dogan.
Dogan sends his best. Dogan expects prompt payment, you know.
Plenty of setup. The cliché of someone new joining a community or returning after a long time is often used to allow characters to share information with the player without it looking like exposition dumps. Unfortunately, Catalyst doesn't give you more than the minimum. Noah doesn't get more than like 3 scenes where he gets to talk about something else other than your objective, but still, there is a much more earnest attempt made here to evoke emotion in the player while also sharing information than in the original. Immediately, the first mission, a simple break-in and data steal, goes haywire when a second thief breaks in at the same time. In the resulting struggle, Faith is detected but flees with different data on a hard drive. She returns to Noah, who chastises her for attacking Kruger security, which is off limits to the runners due to it being the police force of Glass. And Faith says she stole the data because it looked expensive and it might pay off her debt to Dogan. From the start, I consider this a much better characterization. Sure, we still don't entirely care about anyone involved yet, but it's also at the start of the game, and at least this time there is an attempt to keep everyone tied to the plot. Still, I don't like that they are already setting up a grand conspiracy again, and I especially don't like that it's all based on coincidence. After the argument, you bring the drive to a hacker named Plastic for analysis, who is totally not the completely socially inept neuro-atypical stereotype of a hacker with a robot sidekick.
3,
What the hell?
2,
I said cancel.
1.
Almost killed you. Sorry. Come in.
The drive contains the blueprints for Reflection, some unknown upgrade to the Grid, which is the Catalyst version of the internet. Given where you found it, it's definitely bad. After you leave Plastic, a huge bomb explodes in a shopping center to show off just how sexy the Frostbite engine can do destruction. And did you know that in Battlefield you can fight in that? You return to Noah's hideout and are introduced to Rebecca Thane, the leader of Black November, a terrorist group fighting against the oppressive regime by bombing shopping centers. She's there to have an argument with Noah and be introduced to the player. After this, you finally go to Dogon. Why actually, I don't know. You see, Faith wants to sell the drive to Dogon so she can pay off her debt we know nothing about, except I guess that we can read it in a prequel comic the loading screens keep telling me of. But crucially, she didn't take the drive with her. She left it with Plastic because the hacker wants to investigate it further. So why go to Dogon other than it being the next main quest, because she basically goes, hey, I have this expensive drive that Krugasek has been actively looking for to pay off my debt. And Dogon is like, cool, do you have it with you? And Faith is like, no. And Dogon is like, why the empty words then? Anyway, go do a mission for me. Huh? This is the first point where the game truly falters, which sucks because it is literally the first story beat after introducing every character. It doesn't help that by now you've also been traveling back and forth between places a lot and the main problem of the world is beginning to surface and get back into your own section of the video essay, you beast! Anyway. Dogon's mission is climbing a skyscraper that is under construction to release the giant counterweight because the Corp has stopped paying their protection money. You start almost at the bottom and get to climb this tall tower in an honestly expertly paced way. The higher you go, the less rigid and supportive the construction site becomes, the jumps widen and the ground you run on looks like it will fall down with you at any point. The higher you go, the harder it becomes to find a way forward, pushing you out towards the scaffolding of the incomplete tower. The higher you go, the better the view of the vast, beautiful city of glass, with its highways, the coast, the ocean slicing the sun in half. You feel alone, accomplished for having gotten this far, separate from everyone else that you can see in their tiny cars and trams below you. It's a fantastic level. The only downside is that this is the first of many levels that happens outside the open world, linear and completely separate. Motherfucker, I was supposed to talk about the plot. The mission itself has actually zero relevance to the larger narrative of the game. It simply serves to illustrate that Dogon is a ruthless mob boss who does not care about the construction workers still in the skyscraper, which Faith gets out by sounding the fire alarm before completing the main objective. Still, he continues being oddly nice to Faith. Why? I don't know. Dogon likes being mysterious. After this, Noah sends you off to rescue Icarus, who trapped himself by accident. While you two warm up to each other,
those cables should lead you to the switch. I'll owe you one.
Sure. Don't go anywhere.
Funny.
Kasek raids the Runner HQ and Faith only arrives to see them taking the body bags away. Icarus and Faith decide to escape to the HQ of Black November because they have nowhere else to go. They can stay, but only if they pull their weight. This means clearing out turrets in another construction zone so that the Black November squad can safely retreat after having kidnapped Isabel Kruger, the daughter and right hand of Gabriel Kruger, CEO of Kruger Security. Afterwards, Dogon contacts you, claiming that Noah is not dead, but being kept prisoner somewhere unknown. It's literally all said in 2 lines, so forgettable that when writing the script merely hours later, I had to look up again what triggers the belief that Noah is alive.
Dogon here. I have some information for you free of charge. From what I can gather, the news of Noah's unfortunate demise has been greatly exaggerated.
Thank you, Mr. Guy who only does stuff for himself, for this free advice. It's actually free. There are no hooks here. Is this guy even from the Mafia? Faith then talks to Isabel, who says that it's true, Noah is not dead, but any info on his location is going to be at the KSEC HQ database. Faith breaks in and with the help of her trusty hacker friend Plastic, finds out that he's being held at a facility called Kingdom. On request, Plastic also pulls all the info on Isabel Kruger, finding out that she was adopted young and her real name is Caitlin Connors. The sister's parents died at the November riots and they got split in the aftermath. Faith arrives just in time to stop Rebecca from executing Caitlin and asks her to be taken away from the sewers where the BNHQ is, because ever since the death of their parents, Caitlin has issues with her lungs due to excessive tear gas inhalation. Was there no better way to make Faith realize this? For fuck's sake, the character who's supposed to only look out for himself offers information literally free of charge, like some sort of plot dispenser. Seriously, why not have Caitlin slip up during interrogation? She could easily get angry and rant about Noah still being alive to taunt Faith. Name drop Kingdom, have Faith connect the dots because she heard it before, and Plastic would be a reasonable person to know of the KSEC HQ database, given that it is such a juicy, high-value target. This would actually give you some damn emotions interlaced with all these exposition dumps. At the same time, it would at least be an attempt at some tension that you could resolve with Faith saving Caitlin. This way, you put the focus on the sisters, don't degrade the sinister mob boss to somebody just offering free advice, and push Caitlin into something resembling a character arc. She has clearly been brainwashed all her life and believes everyone outside the system is a freeloader, so show it in some form other than using the word leech all the time. Use that antagonistic attitude for something. Oh well. I guess I look at the Catalyst plot in the same way I look at a dam full of water. Damn, that's a lot of currently unused potential energy. Anyway, it is also important to note that during the KSEC HQ level, Plastic, who has been investigating the reflection drive, reveals to you what reflection is. An injection which will permanently connect someone to the grid, of course with remote control powers built in, though for some reason they obscure the last part, as if it isn't terribly obvious. Faith returns to Dogen begging for information on where to find Kingdom. He gives it to her again.
Get out of my sight before I cut you up for stew. Faith, I'm not in the mood. Do you have the blueprint?
No. And I need a favor.
And a new home, from what I hear. Do you also find it mystifying that I keep on giving and get nothing in return?
Please. I need to find a facility called Kingdom. Noah's being held there.
Kingdom. The conglomerate's dirty little secret.
Faith goes there to rescue Noah, but only succeeds at him dying in her arms. During the mission, you rescue some imprisoned scientists. One of them clearly states that the goal of reflection is remotely controlling emotions and thoughts. I swear, after this game, I'm gonna have blunt force trauma from how obvious it is told to the player. You flee, taking a couple of those scientists with you. They help Plastic form a plan to stop reflection. Caitlin is rescued by KSEC while being taken topside by Black November. Icarus, who was doing Overwatch for Faith on Caitlin, gets injected with reflection. This bears no further relevance to the plot except in an attempt to make it more personal and raise the stakes. If you don't care about Icarus, it doesn't matter. After Noah's death, Faith is broken and depressed, thinking that reflection cannot be stopped anymore. Plastic says that to stop it they need Kruger's personal access to the grid. Naturally, this plot point is resolved with a 20-second pep talk by Dogen of all people.
Celebrity visit.
You gonna break my legs now? Might as well get it over with.
You should finish what you started. Then I can have your legs broken, if you want.
There's nothing to finish!
Who reveals that Kruger has a personal apartment in the most exclusive region of the map with a home office. Side note? It felt incredibly strange to hear a game from 2016 use the word home office considering how prevalent it became during the COVID pandemic. Really odd feeling. You go there, break in, fight your way through KSEC because Faith is done running away and this is her dark, edgy arc, even though you have been obliterating KSEC forces throughout the entire game, and get Kruger's access. He also fucking Zoom calls you and Faith and him exchange some mean words that give you no new information. Man, this game sure predicted the pandemic lifestyle entirely by accident, huh? After this déjà vu-inducing conversation, Black November attacks the Shard, the highest building in the city and seat of the corporate board, not destroying but severely damaging it. Plastic tells you that they have the reflection countermeasures ready, but that you will need to get to the top of the shard to deploy them, which you do. After something resembling a boss fight, Gabriel Kruger shows up, and fortunately we're spared a boss fight with a middle-aged CEO of a huge corporation. Caitlin is also there and saves Faith's life a number of times, though the two fail to make up entirely. You stop the deployment of reflection but fail to initiate a revolution, because how else could they keep the open world going after the final mission? Kruger dies, and Caitlin ascends the throne of the Kruger-Sec CEO chair. And that's it. Icarus asks Faith what she'll do next, and she simply says, run. She does get her iconic tattoos, which are based on the drawings of her late mother and had been kept by Dogen, who gives them to Faith as a reward for stopping reflection out of personal interest. In a completely controlled world, there is no place for organized crime after all. Why he gives her the drawing and doesn't instead consider the debt that she still has with him paid, I do not understand. I think the only logical reason is because the game has to end with her getting her iconic tattoos. But the debt isn't mentioned again.
So is it personnel? Is really your sister?
Policy and grounds for contract termination.
Mind blown.
I'm Gabriel Kruger. Thank you.
In the cinematic, Faith observed that something had changed because the runners had started something. Something is the writer's attempt to find closure when it clearly cannot be offered to the player for gameplay reasons, and it perfectly encapsulates what a nothing burger it really is. Nothing more than an excuse to keep you moving from point A to point B. Ironically, despite the first game succeeding so much at conveying the focus in its gameplay, it is where the second game falters. Not fails, but falters. The plot pulls into too many directions. I think Catalyst being a reboot, the writers wanted to stick with the plot of the first game but also add stuff to it. In both games, you end up climbing a huge skyscraper called the Shard in order to stop an evil plan coming to fruition. In Catalyst, it is stopping the eradication of free will, and in Mirror's Edge, you're saving the runners. In all fairness to the ending, a revolution would be unrealistic. The plot mentions multiple times that the people loved the idea of reflection, the mind-altering abilities of it were never made public, and nothing in the story is about convincing the general population of anything. Black November seems to think that by bombing civilians you will get the sheeple to wake up, but because you never see a different earnest attempt being made to change the status quo, you're left with living in the system, fighting the system by killing innocents, or abandoning the system and the fight against it by existing on its sidelines. But if the fight against the system isn't the focus, why write such a plot? While neither of the games stand out because of its story, at least in the original, the plan was contained. You realize that the runners are being tracked, and you go up to the shard to do one thing only: save Caitlin. Destroying the servers is a completely incidental action you do because it unlocks the roof, not because you're interested in downing the evil regime. You don't even do anything about the plan. You just kind of warn everybody and then you leave, as the radio broadcast during the credits betrays. With Catalyst, the scope of the story is expanded a lot, but one of the titles for this video I had in my head referred to this being the main issue with the plot. Faith is not special, she's not particularly charismatic or extremely smart, but she is very good at parkour. The writers try to remedy this by her being surrounded and related to all these special people, but the best thing they could come up with is that the old guard, that is, her parents Noah and Rebecca, all used to belong to the same group of friends, and that she owes Dogen a debt. Faith is simply the wrong character to pick if you're looking to write a story about an uprising or any meaningful change, because her power level is too low and because this is ultimately a game about running somewhere. When Zero Punctuation reviewed the game, he identified the same issue. Remember the mission where you have to clear the way for the Black November kidnapping squad? You run around, disabling one turret after the other, and it is genuinely a great level gameplay-wise, but while it's all happening, you have the constant chatter in your ear about how the actual kidnapping mission is going, and it seems like you're missing all the fun. The best thing is that you are only clearing one of two potential escape routes, and yours doesn't even end up getting used. The plot does exactly the same thing it did in the original, provide an excuse to go from A to B in a beautiful world and nothing more. If I had to choose, I do prefer the original from a structural perspective, because by being less ambitious, it avoids a lot of the flaws that Catalyst has, despite the reboot having a better story. Both are distinctly meh, but the first one's story is easier to ignore, while Catalyst tries to soar higher and thus falls harder. The construction skyscraper level at the start of the game is a good example. It is a great idea about having to scale a tower, break it at the top and then descend down before it falls apart. I think the idea for the level came first, and then the writers realized they needed to incorporate it into the plot. The issue is that we have a mystery plot going on with reflection, and destroying a skyscraper doesn't fit. I think Dogen and the Dead is the result of them forcing it in, and for me that explains why it feels so disjointed to the rest of the plot. He could be an avenue for making the plot more personal, but he is never taken advantage of, so what you end up with is this linear story with a ton of moving elements that don't mesh. Dogen is introduced as a ruthless mob boss to justify the skyscraper level, but afterwards he's never shown in that light. He doesn't seem threatening, and because you get to save the construction workers in the level, Faith is not forced into a situation that could lead to a dilemma and character growth. I think that's because ultimately all the developers needed was justification for a big action set piece level and nothing more. Dogen is presented, and I'd like to note his presentation is great as this unknown threatening entity, but every time Faith fails, he just lets it pass, or worse, gives Faith what she needs anyway. Later on, this is justified with him wanting reflection gone, but from an in-character perspective, he only finds out fairly late what reflection actually is. Before that, he has no reason to be lenient to Faith. He just is, and it clashes with the image of a ruthless mob boss that the game says he is but doesn't actually ever show. Telling but not showing, and even worse, telling something that is contrary to what is being shown, is an issue that Catalyst has a lot. I think it would have aided if Dogen was pushed more into a charismatic, opportunistic villain role. He likes Faith because of her attitude and running skills, but causes her discomfort by threatening to somehow harm her friends or blackmailing her in some other way. On the other hand, when harming the conglomerate, Dogen could serve as an ally who helps out Faith by providing resources free of charge. It could also lead to an actual character arc for Faith, where the direct young woman learns how to maneuver a conversation with Dogen to get him to do what she wants, learning from his methods. He seems to be at least platonically smitten with her, so continually impressing him with more daring jobs could lead to an interesting dynamic where enemies turn to allies, if not more, eventually leading to a moment where Faith calls his bluff when he threatens to hurt her friends, and the cold, calculating crime lord finds himself not wanting to hurt his favorite runner. There you go, a personal story with personal stakes, which gives the devs plenty of opportunity to use all those set-piece levels for those daring jobs and has actual character arcs, Faith improving her charisma and Dogen becoming a bit more human. With how he is in the game, he just seems like yet another paternal figure that has a different vibe than Noah. I'd give you a similarly big section about Noah, but I can't. He leads the little group of runners based out of the transit station. He taught Faith running, and he knows that some targets are off limits for runners because fucking with the system is a good way to get crushed between its cogs. There's nothing interesting about him as a character. He's the dad and he dies, but because all of the story falls flat, his death doesn't hit the emotional punch the game makes it out to be. Icarus is the antagonizing cocky sidekick that has some good banter with Faith, but everything that happens to him in the plot is predictable from the start. Gabriel Kruger is a villain. Caitlin has the potential to be interesting, but the problem is that the game is not interested in exploring the relationship of the sisters at all. They both save each other's lives. She blames Faith for leaving her even though they were only 7 years old when their parents died, and while two sisters growing up so differently, one an outcast runner, the other groomed to be the heir of one of the most important corporations in Glass, this confrontation never happens. She is a complete and full believer of the system, and only in the ending cinematic does any sort of progress for the character even start. I understand that crafting a story which interlaces with gameplay is hard for this game because traversal is the only thing you can do, but there is something to be said about having a really good core gameplay loop and then telling a story through voice lines in the game or cinematics. While the greatest games marry gameplay and story, great games can still keep the two separate. Warcraft 3 tells a fantastic story mostly through cinematics, and the gameplay is completely divorced from it. You could pick it up, change the assets to be more sci-fi, and call the result something like StarCraft if you aren't great with names. Games don't need to be an intricate marriage of gameplay and plot to be great. Even more modern games like The Last of Us tell a fantastic story that is not related to the gameplay mechanics or the core gameplay loop at all. It is very rare that a game nails that, and the only one that comes to mind for me is Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons, where you control two brothers with one controller, one thumbstick each, at the same time. It's unfortunate that the game is uninterested in exploring this relationship. Caitlin suffers from lung disease, which upon capture by Black November worsens because she is underground with bad air. This offers plenty of opportunity for Faith to complete runs for supplies to keep her alive and for Caitlin to slowly learn and accept that despite her sister being a willing outcast and thus leech of the system, as Caitlin calls her many times, she's still saving her life instead of sucking it out. Hell, if you wanted Dogen involved in this, Caitlin's disease could serve as a great plot device to get Faith to complete missions for him she might be morally opposed to, so he can use his black market magic to procure medicine for Caitlin while Black November refuses to release or treat her, instead of blackmailing Faith by threatening violence. The final act could be Faith refusing to do something and him providing curing medicine anyway. You find out Faith's backstory from nightmares she has exclusively, so clearly it still haunts her that she left her sister behind and thought she was dead. It could be a way to provide closure for the character, you know? Emotions aren't logical, and no matter how much everyone tells her that she couldn't have saved Caitlin and she knows it's true, she still feels like she needs to find some form of redemption. It's right there! You're so close to something good! Plastic can be annoying by herself, but her personality can lead to fun interactions when she talks with other characters. Luckily, the game avoids too much exposure to her antics, which keeps her on the enjoyable side of odd rather than the unbearable one. Faith's mother is the more interesting one out of her parents, as she was the principal scientist driving reflection development. The game attempts to use this as some sort of moral conflict for Faith, but considering that her parents died at a protest against the regime, it's pretty clear cut that whatever reflection was at the start, it was different before Kruger corrupted it and Faith's mother wanted nothing more to do with it. Her dad existed. He seemed nice. Rebecca Thane works as the ruthless leader of the resistance, and within the context of her own character, everything she does is completely believable. Since she starts out as an ally but then gradually grows more extreme, at least according to what the game tells you instead of showing you, can you spot the pattern? To the discomfort of both Icarus and Faith, pushing them closer together, they leave the hideout after the Kingdom mission because Thane doesn't want the scientists there. It all makes sense if you ignore the fact that the way she's introduced to the plot is by bombing a shopping mall, which is the most extreme action of Black November, even eclipsing the bombing of the Shard in the finale. However, the characters in the game react to her as if she was becoming more extreme, which is a little strange. There's a neat little side mission she offers which offers a bit more characterization on Caitlin and also some interesting information on how glass works, but that's about it. Just in case you didn't realize yet how the city works, here's a character spelling it out for you.
Understand is that the very same ideal of personal achievement discourages it, as one man's gain is by necessity another man's loss. With our society already rigidly stratified, the same people will always gain, and the same people will always lose. Black November intends to create a society where everyone contributes equally, which is matched by everyone being equally valued. The families claim we're trying to rebuild Amistad, but that's just not true. The only way to create a sustainable society is to accept that the individual must always be less than the collective, not more as it is here, for some. What the families never tell anyone is that their way is utterly unsustainable. There just isn't enough energy or resources left for us to go on. The endless consumption we've grown accustomed to.
It makes the mission sound like a bad thing, but I did actually like it. The level is well designed and vertigo-inducing, and when the game manages to trigger my fear of heights in a safe way, that causes a rush of adrenaline that is cool.
Bro, where the fuck do I need to go? Oh. Jesus. I don't like heights in real life, man. This is actually getting to me. Speaks to the qualities of this game.
That is indicative of a well-designed game, and I enjoyed the monologue of information given to me. I know I've clowned on the game for being very obvious with its storytelling, but at least here it also serves as a way to better understand the character. And there's some actual information in there too, which tells you more about Black November and Thane's philosophy. Faith herself is not too interesting, mostly because she doesn't go anywhere as a character. She starts off as a cocky almost teenager and ends as a cocky almost teenager. The loss inflicted upon her in the plot with Noah's death and the depression induced by it lasts all of 20 seconds, and since she is the main character, you can do everything because you have the power of reloading when you die. Characterizing her as the best runner in the city works at least, and she never offended me to the point of classifying her as annoying, so overall she's alright. I just wish she wasn't as flat as a pancake plot-wise. I would also like to highlight that pretty much all the issues with Catalyst stem from two sources: the open world, writing, and a little bit of the gameplay. None of these characters fail because of issues with voice acting, animation, or similar things. Catalyst remains a beautiful game and its presentation is top-notch, including the story cinematics. I've mentioned multiple options on how I would improve the game if I could, and I do have more of those in store, especially in relation to that one mission of Catalyst that I mentioned at the start, that short glimpse of an actually interesting tale that made me realize just how empty this world was on my first playthrough. But let's talk gameplay first. The core gameplay loop of Catalyst is great. Running feels great. I think the developers did an amazing job at porting the running of the original into a new game almost 10 years after the original's release. Comparing them back to back, Catalyst is definitely easier but also tighter, still requiring skill. There are much fewer issues where Faith should have grabbed a ledge or a pipe but didn't than in the original. Faith feels faster and lighter, which leads to a less obsessive focus on momentum that the original game had. I respect Mirror's Edge for that. It made that momentum feel earned, while in Catalyst you have a button that immediately pushes you up to max speed, which is my only complaint. The game shouldn't have needed that, and sure, removing it would likely require further changes in the gameplay, but I'd rather see it gone. I think that by losing that obsession with momentum and giving you that instant speed button, it also shows that with Catalyst, the developers lost their focus a bit too much, and that shows with the combat. Like the original, the game tells you that you can ignore most of the combat in the game, but still occasionally locks you in a combat arenas with literal waves of enemies to fight. And while I appreciate the movement and combo-based system that the developers have created, it is much better than the original game. It's not a high bar to pass, and far from good. The issue is that in isolation, the combat basis is good. With a bit more refinement of enemy AI and more positional moves so that it is easier to dodge enemies and move them for your ultimate damage dealers, this could have been great. But it clashes with the core game principle of momentum and running because you have to stop to do it. I don't mean literally stop, I mean stop on the way to your objective. It additionally clashes with the narrative. Clint Hocking coined the term ludonarrative dissonance in 2007. It defines the issue where gameplay and story conflict significantly. While Hocking uses the term to critique Bioshock, I know the term from a video essay about Uncharted, where the light-hearted story of adventuring and exploring ancient temples significantly conflicts with the shooter gameplay where you kill hundreds, if not thousands of enemies. Basically, the gameplay demands a large amount of exchangeable enemies to fight while the story takes a more grounded approach. Catalyst has the same issue. Cascadia and Glass is said to be this all-encompassing, oppressive surveillance state, but the most direct projection of force that it has against the player, KSEC, is never a big issue. Already in the tutorial, you're plowing through enemies placed in your path with ease. You're never shown just how dangerous Glass can be, and when Glass tries, you fuck the city up. By running, you generate a shield which stops you from taking damage from bullets, a gameplay design element I'm sure the devs included so you can rush past enemies with guns to avoid the insane health regen problem from the first game, but since you are doing parkour while fighting, that shield is always regenerating. One of the best moves to knock out opponents is to run up a wall, turn around and jump at them. The movement generates shield and makes you harder to hit, and the top-down attack deals a lot of damage, knocking out weaker opponents in one hit. The fact that guns can't properly damage you in most cases is insane. Why would an oppressive state that controls the media be worried about taking enemies alive? I would change two things to make the gameplay more direct and align the idea of an oppressive state with the gameplay. Firstly, the game uses stamina as a placeholder for health, implying that you just knock out people and they knock you out too. It is pretty hard to knock someone out in real life though. While in the game, to keep things fast and snappy, most enemies go down in a few punches and stay down too. They're essentially dead. Instead, Kasich guards, when knocked out, should get helped up again by their allies. This would make it so that the only way to remove someone permanently from a fight is to push them off a ledge and actually kill them. It also reinforces the idea that you are a runner, not a fighter, and you should not be fighting because the state is fucking dangerous and you just spent 2 years in a prison. Yet here you are, taking down like 5 enemies with 0 issues very early in the game. Have you ever been in a fight with just one person? How about 2? Unless the circumstances are very specific, fighting just 2 people at the same time is borderline impossible. Faith should be revered as a goddess of war. The second is that there should be more ways to attack while not losing momentum. You should be able to run past a group of guards and maybe knock out one of them and immediately move on. The game does offer a few ways to do this, but because the cost of staying and fighting is so low, there's little consequence to you just knocking everyone out unless you are on a timer. If Kasich was more dangerous, then you could use a move like that to knock out the one guy with a gun and run away with fewer or no bullets flying in your direction. Which, if the bullets were actually more dangerous, could be of actual value to you. It would force you to weigh your approach and direct the one attack you can afford at the guy with the ranged weapon. Maybe introduce an injury system so that those encounters can, semi-permanently, cost you something like your agility that you need to fix later on when you have a moment of time and you aren't on a timer or something. It is also really weird to me that there are no actual chases in the game. The basic enemy AI is not very smart. They don't really follow you and always guard a specific spot. I thought that the game offered this with a side activity called diversions, where you are tasked with occupying Kasich while someone else does something illegal in the area. I thought that the goal was to approach enemies and then stay in line of sight to keep a chase going, but after failing a couple of times, I took another look at what the game actually said diversions were, just another timed run, but with checkpoints placed within groups of enemies standing around. Mind you, there's not enough time to actually fight any one of them, so it is literally yet another timed run with added shouting from enemies. There's nothing else different about it. Even the original added actual chasing enemies that parkoured the rooftops trying to catch up to you. And while that only happened like 2 or 3 times, executed a bit better and used appropriately, this could have been a great addition to the game, especially in an open world. The state using the technique of the runners against them, maybe by hiring ex-runners, would have been a fantastic way to make it seem more oppressive. This could be very dangerous enemies that you could design a ton of interesting missions around. There is technically a chase mechanic in the game, but it involves being chased by drones, trying to get out of its area of effect or returning to a safe house which stops the chase. Wouldn't leading Kasich to a runner hideout be like a bad thing? Having nowhere to hide and needing to escape would be much better. Need for Speed Most Wanted, the 2005 release, still remains in my top spot of well done chases in games. The way it starts off easy and at the end you actually have to try to escape is an incredible experience that makes a successful escape very satisfying to accomplish. Why doesn't the game centered around traversal and moving from point A to B have this element too? It would have also been a great opportunity to tell stories around why people joined Kasich, especially after being a runner. Why would you give up your independence to try to destroy what you once were? Did love pull you back into the regular world? Did running stop you from affording some luxury? Were you done with living on the edge and jumped? What a ridiculous line. Catalyst happens inside an open world divided into distinct zones. While main missions take you out of it, side missions remain within it, giving you extra content. Additionally, there are typical open world activities like quick time deliveries, tiny enemy outposts to destroy, or deliveries where you can't take damage, or a different form of quick time deliveries. Additionally, unlocking fast travel is climbing a tower, which sounds like the most typical 2016 open world shit ever until you realize that running is the only thing you do and they fit in perfectly. The towers are great, honestly. There are also your usual collectibles like documents and voice recordings, which are the most interesting since they are the only thing that gives you more info about the world. You just better hope that nothing else interrupts you listening to them after you pick them up, because listening to them again happens inside a menu you cannot leave. Seriously, what the fuck? I do really enjoy the presentation and different vibes of the different zones. Zone 1 around the transit hub and the tutorial area remind me of the first game the most. Then you gain access to a higher middle class area that marks a stark difference, with much more glossy areas, a lot more glass to allow in sunlight, and the occasional waterfall or pool. The last area you unlock is the most exclusive one, where you run through lavish, open areas, giant kitchens and bedrooms and penthouses that take up the roofs of entire buildings and often span multiple floors. There's also the sewers and a construction zone, which are neat, but not that interesting beyond the change of visuals, and which you will visit only sparsely after discovering it. Notably, the soundscape accompanies the presentation perfectly. Zone 1, with its low-income housing, is full of constantly blaring public service announcements, advertisements, and plastered full of billboards. Zone 2 removes the billboards and replaces them with serene animations, but you can still often hear announcements come through from Zone 1.
Attention. Reflection will change the way you interact with the grid. Reflection will change the way you look at life. Reflection will change everything.
Zone 3 is so far removed that it is completely quiet. I found this the area where I remember the ambient soundtrack the most, simply because I'm not being bombarded with propaganda all the time. It's really good sound design. The issue comes from the fact that the world isn't really open in the same way that Witcher or GTA is. Glass is, of course, an empire of rooftops which form your playground, but instead of a sandbox, they are more like winding narrow paths where there is really only one way to go from one point to another. The paths connecting the zones are evidence of this, and you will by far tread these the most out of all of them. From a gameplay perspective, the one reason you want an open world is to facilitate exploration. You want the player to see a building or a hill and make them go, I want to see what is on top of that building or behind that hill, and then make their way towards that goal, usually finding more adventures as they do. If you cannot facilitate this feeling, then the open world serves no purpose, and you might as well have made a linear game. You can still make big levels if you want, but one still comes after the other. I would argue that in Catalyst it's even worse. As I mentioned in the section about the original, that familiarity of the world is what allows a player to fill in the gaps with their own imagination. The original game is shallow still, but the fact that you cannot linger on that as a player because you are always pushing forward from one level to the next stops you from ever realizing that. Catalyst, with its open world, does not. As you play through the main missions, you usually have a target to push towards, and running towards the quest marker is a purpose that the world serves reasonably well. It is after you finish the game with its distinctly meh ending that it all completely falls apart. You see, the world of Catalyst is completely static and dead. It's like the world of an MMO, where NPCs stand around to give you out a quest and nothing more, where the real life of the world comes from the players. A number of those time delivery quests come from such NPCs, where you deliver one item from one guy to another guy. Sometimes you get a few tidbits of information around their lives, usually about how completely artificial glass is, with the most people outside of the highest case not having seen a real plant or eaten real animal produce ever. But then you deliver the item, and the people continue standing around. They don't ever hand you a quest again, but they continue standing there. The developers didn't even implement a simple despawning animation where they walk towards the nearest door and disappear. It completely shatters immersion. It works in MMOs because you have hundreds of players filling up the world. It doesn't work here because you are alone. The world is also really empty because outside of the occasional KSEC guards standing around and those immobile NPCs, nothing lives. You don't see another runner occasionally in the distance on a delivery run. Even the enemies don't ever move more than 10 meters away from their spawning location. It's still and dead. The only time you see people walking is NPCs behind glass walls in their offices or in the distance on the ground, and even those are mostly standing around. This is somewhat acceptable as long as you are in Zone 1, which is clearly just roofs where you would rarely find people, But even there, you could have little corners of outcasts doing stuff like sitting around and chatting or playing music around a trash bin campfire, who knows? This flaw becomes most evident in Zone 3 though. Since you are running through actual people's homes, the fact that the rooftops are so completely devoid of life is harrowing. While you have people chatting into your ear a lot during the story, it's easier to ignore, but once you are actually left alone with the world, you finally realize how isolating it is to exist here. The game shows you other people always behind a glass door or on a different out-of-bounds roof doing something, and it just makes me feel sad. It makes me feel like I'm not existing in a world, but in an illusion of it. Even worse, I think it could have been easier to ignore had it not been for that one side mission featuring Beatrix Bluch. I mean, what's worse? Watching a movie that is bad throughout, not redeemable and boring, or watching a movie that just scrapes by being good, but clearly has heart and passion in it, but simply just doesn't land its punch? What's worse? Putting down a book forever after 100 pages because you are dead certain that it's not gonna get better, or sticking with it, desperately hoping that those genuinely interesting seeds of a story planted by the author will blossom into something only to get disappointed? What's worse? Sitting in a dark room forever, or witnessing the great painting in front of you in a flash of lightning, knowing you'll never be able to see it again? Beatrix is that flash of lightning. Late in the game, a peculiar side mission unlocks. As far as I can tell, it's one of only 2 side missions which aren't there to introduce you to yet another open world timed chase, but have actually something to say, the other being the one where Rebecca Thane tells you about her interactions with Caitlin as you climb the tower. At that point in the game, I was content with letting the story pass over me on my original playthrough. You are at the start of the final act, and it's clear that at this point, if you aren't hooked, you are just along for the ride. But something new popped up on the map after one of those missions, something that got me to ask questions. And if you are asking questions, well, you have your audience ready to get hooked, you have piqued their interest. The quest subtitle on the map simply reads, "Talk to Beatrix Bluch," which is strange because that is definitely a completely new name. Who is that? Why does she want to talk to you? You click on the quest to get more information. You met Beatrix Bluch briefly, shortly before your capture 2 years ago, and the two of you had a short but honest conversations. She might be high-cased, but there is still something you can relate to in her. Now she needs your help with something, though whatever a woman like her might need help with is beyond you. Holy shit. Faith existed before the start of the game. This world might not be all paper-thin facade that gives you a dumb reason to go from A to B. Who is this woman? Why does an upper-class member of society need you? Under what context have you, a runner, and her met before? What was the conversation that you had about? Am I going to find out a bit more about how people live, finally? Questions, interest, I'm so in, let's go. After the dullness of the narrative that came before, this is a completely unexpected and fresh start. You race there and get a short cinematic laying out Beatrix's issue.
I honestly never expected to see you again.
It's been a while, hasn't it, Faith? Ours was one of the few honest conversations I've ever had. What happened to you?
I screwed up. They put me away, and now I'm out.
And you're also the main topic at a great many cocktail parties. Kruger hates you and your kind.
The feeling's mutual. What can I help you with, Beatrix?
Well, since we last met, I've gotten married. A corporate union. His name is Peter Bryson.
And you had no say in this?
It was a board decision. An attempt to further unify Bryson Industries and Cascadia Logistics.
But that's crazy.
Well, it's my reality. And I would be okay with it, duty and all. But...
You're scared.
Peter likes to argue with his fists.
Want me to break his wrists?
Tempting. But no. I want to divorce him, and I think I know a way. Rumor has it that he's sleeping with Aurora LePan Tanner. An affair like that would be cause enough.
But you need proof.
Yes.
If you could plant these bugs at the locations I'll send you, I'm sure I could get enough for the board to annul the marriage.
I'll do it. Send me the locations.
I will. Thanks, Faith. I'll owe you one. A big one.
So Beatrix is in an arranged marriage with the heir of another large company she'd be fine with if her husband wasn't abusive. And you need to help her collect evidence against him by planting bugs in places he fucks his mistress in so that Beatrix can try to divorce him. Along the way to your targets, Plastic interjects and she and Beatrix have an honestly great conversation that characterizes Beatrix as a warm, kind and patient woman who just wants out of a shit situation.
Best fighter she knows. Wait, who's this? Get ready! I'm Plastic. And we're Beatrix Block, heir of Stick and Skating Logistics, married to Peter Bryson. Not for much longer, I hope. Next place is his little hideaway apartment. I know he takes her there all the time. What is this all about? Who are you again? I told you already. I'm Plastic. Faith is my friend. Well, Plastic, my husband is an abusive, ego-tripping cheat, and I want to divorce him. So why don't you? Faith is helping me by planting these bugs. Oh. Okay. There's a balcony right outside the bedroom. Plant the bug there. You want to listen to him sleeping? Not exactly, Plastic. His mistress will be there too. Oh, shut up, Puma.
Okay, the second bug is in place. Where to next?
His office. I've sent you the location. Thank you so much for doing this.
I wish I could get my hands on the question right this minute. I need something to tell me why I'm doing it.
The Bryson office has some advanced security systems in place. The bug is undetectable. The salesman said so. The bug might be, but Faith isn't. Expect some company when you're there, Faith.
That's it. All done.
And the alert has been triggered. You should get away from there.
Hope you get what you need, Beatrix.
I'm sure I will. Thanks again, Faith.
Throughout this quest, you'll learn more about the inner workings of Glass than in any other mission. I later learned that Faith and Beatrix know each other from a prequel comic that EA released called Mirror's Edge Exordium, where they meet in a nightclub and have a short conversation about security and freedom. Faith thinks that Beatrix has it all, while Beatrix explains that she just lives in a golden cage. She also comments that she couldn't be in the nightclub if she weren't wasted because the music sucks, which as someone who has done that before, I relate to a lot. The quest ends too quickly though. You just go to 2 places and that's it. You don't even learn if Beatrix succeeded in getting the marriage annulled with her evidence. To encounter such a terrible and unfortunately familiar situation in a world so different immersed me for the duration of the quest, which was like under 10 minutes. Why not base the game around something like this? Trash the entire Save the World storyline, make it about a woman from an entirely different social class reaching out to Faith because she has no one else to ask for help. I mean, the game establishes runners as opportunistic burglars and you need to gather intelligence on Beatrix's husband, which would be a perfect opportunity. Dogen could rope in nicely here too, giving access to information, tools and locations. Make the thing an intense legal fight where both sides fight dirty, one to stay in power and the other to break free of it. Wouldn't that be exactly what the runners are about? The powerful opposing side thinks they can rely on knowing everything by inspecting communications in the grid until you start transporting it out of reach of the surveillance, giving you an edge. You could say a mirror's edge, potentially. Beatrix mentions that with the evidence she hopes to get the board to annul the marriage, there's absolutely plenty of opportunity there to build a narrative around that, and it's still about breaking the system, about escaping it, just on a much more relatable, much more tolerable scale. You could have missions trying to find dirt on board members to pressure them into agreeing to set Beatrix free. You could run missions for Dogen in order to get valuable info on those board members or try to find a different way. You could have missions where you have to infiltrate high society events. Beatrix mentions that Faith is the topic of many cocktail parties. Wouldn't that be a fun interaction between the two, where Beatrix gives her a makeover which Faith would hate but goes through because she wants Beatrix free, giving us something different other than runner Faith, who does not keep her mouth shut when interacting with people? Wouldn't it be great to hear high society members rant on about a runner standing right in front of them in disguise? Wouldn't it be great to see some of them secretly gossip about how they admire her? She could try to utilize her skills learned from Dogen's interactions by learning stuff from other party guests as she works towards whatever goal she'd need to achieve there. You'd see a character out of their comfort zone. Hell, she might even meet some nice people, adding shades of grey to the classic corporate rich overlords narrative, because that's what people are. They exist in the system, and if the cruelty of it all is happening far away, they too look away, so they don't have to do anything. It's like vaguely knowing that buying a t-shirt made in Bangladesh fucking sucks for everyone involved in the process, but being able to ignore it because to you, it's just a label after all. I've given a number of suggestions now on how Catalyst could be improved, and I want to stress that I don't want to see them all executed at the same time. It could be possible, but it would be pretty hard to tie all of these narrative strings together. You could, given a properly implemented open world, but that would likely be too much development money to invest on a niche series like this. I think the Beatrix approach is the best though, because it gives you insight into something that would otherwise be completely closed off to Faith as an outcast. She could interact with criminal networks even without Dogen. She could interact with a resistance movement easily, they use runners all the time. There are plenty of roads into those groups. But getting into high society is such a completely stratified society is nigh impossible. Beatrix is a way in, and in that short interaction in the game, she was more human than any other character. After the mission was done, it became all the more obvious how shallow the game truly is. I finished the story and the final mission is a bombastic set piece. I love it, but my mind was stuck at what a more appropriate tale freeing Beatrix would have been for this game and for Faith, the runners as a group, and the story we could have had. With Beatrix having grown up in a caste where everything relies on personal connections, while Faith grew up within the runners and always speaks her mind, this would have been a great foil between the two, something that they could have learned from each other. Beatrix putting more value on her independence and Faith learning to converse better, manage social ties. This could have been tied in with Noah's death, where Faith succeeds him as a leader of the group and needs actual managerial expertise that Beatrix could have provided, because running well and talking to people are two different skill sets. This story doesn't have to end with Beatrix breaking off all ties or even becoming a runner, but it can be about the formation of a meaningful and deep friendship between two women across the firmest of social divisions. This is why the flash of lightning makes the game so much more frustrating. I sit here spitballing ideas that fall into place so naturally and seem so much better than what is in the game already, and instead I'm left with a world so paper thin it made me quit the game immediately after the main story ended. I tried to enjoy what was left to do, but it felt incredibly meaningless and frustrated me to no end. One of the issues I have not touched upon is that to me personally, it seems like the developers were deeply uninterested in making an open world game. I have done no research nor tried to confirm this hunch, but based on the mission and gameplay, it seems like a logical conclusion to me. Pretty much every mission takes place in an entirely separate linear level designed specifically for the mission. The open world exists for NPCs to stand still in and for side activities that are not very interesting. Instead of designing the game with it in mind, it seems like more tacked on. If you cannot facilitate exploration, then what are you really doing with it? All this work that has gone into planning, designing and making the open world can be used elsewhere. Why not have a mission where you have to get some old object, like maybe a vinyl of a now illegal song, because everything is being streamed through the grid and you have to journey into an old part of town that is collapsing. Instead of looking at shit collapsing, you now have to parkour through it. You could use the level and design surroundings that look more like the original, perhaps overgrown or something like that. And because you are carrying something fragile on your way back, rolling to avoid damage would fail the mission, forcing the player into running the same or a similar route differently than they did on their way to the goal. And at the end, you would get a bunch of poor people jamming to old, very different music as a reward, something tangible and human that only you could have accomplished as a runner. A collapsing city would have also given you opportunity to show off your engine with plenty of sexy collapsing buildings too. It just feels so wasted. There are two things I appreciate though, both minor but still important to me. One is the bags you can collect. In the original, every level had a number of yellow bags slightly hidden away, marked by a clearly visible runner symbol. It got you to stop and investigate to find it. These return in Catalyst with the runner symbol and also now make a persistent noise so you can hear it if you run past. Often they are placed in such a way that you can see the bag but not the way to it, forcing you to think about your environment in new ways.
I'm starting to think this isn't the way forward. This is just going to kill me. It's not. Cool. Oh, I see. Can I don't think I can. Get down here. Oh, it automatically dropped it down. That is so nice of them. Thank you, game.
I really like that. Instead of blindly running from point A to point B, following your runner vision like you always do, you use your eyes to find out how to get there, and the design of it is often small but clever. It's usually a puzzle that takes you a couple of minutes and made me feel accomplished every time I found one. The second is a marvelous addition of muffled voices when you run through the world and past windows and events.
Most of this is havoc on my nerves. I wish I could get my hands on the question like this man. I need something to tell me why I'm doing it. That's what's so calm. You have to put it down. That's what's so wonderful.
There are specific locations where this happens, and it's always just one or two sentences meant to be heard while passing by or sometimes not quite understood. These have a lot of different vibes. Often people are struggling with deadlines at work, sometimes in their private life, or doubting what's on the news and missing the good old days, or sometimes they see you and go call KSEC. It's fun to stop and listen in because it induces the feeling like there just might be something beyond a wall, an apartment where people live, rather than the end of the game world and nothing. Pretty often, if you stop, the game reacts by playing a voice line of the people seeing you and calling KSEC, which is funny, especially in the parts where there isn't a window and there is no way for them to see you, but I appreciate the attempt nonetheless. Even after all this negative talk, I did still enjoy my time with Catalyst. Like I said, the core gameplay loop of running is near perfect and you can ignore most of the combat. It was the Beatrix quest that got all of these emotions started in me, which eventually turned into this video. I think without it, I could have written the story off as simply meh, but it's that glimpse of a better story that intrigues me, giving me that intense wish that it could have been something more. But it's not. It's not even that Catalyst betrays the legacy. The story of the original was nothing to write home about anyway. But a new entry is supposed to improve upon the original, and yet it does well in the same areas that the original game did, fails in exactly the same areas too, and doesn't stick with me like the original does. It just fails with more bravado because I do truly believe that the developers tried, and you do see it often. Glimpses of a great game that only managed to be good. A game which doesn't stick with me due to its unique presentation and gameplay, but only for what it could have been.